There was a time when a whole town could go to sleep with the doors unlocked, and it was not because folks were careless, it was because of a single habit, a quiet habit, one that lived out on the front porch, between the supper dishes and the last light of day. You probably remember it, even if you have not thought about it in years. The creak of a wooden chair, the hush of evening settling over the street, and somewhere down the block, the low murmur of voices carrying on the warm air. But here is what almost nobody tells you. That porch was not just a place to rest, it was the reason your grandmother never feared her own neighborhood. And by the end of this story, you are going to understand exactly how that simple wooden platform did the work that 100 cameras cannot do today. Stay with me, because the most important part comes near the end, and it will change the way you look at your own front door. Picture a street in the year 1955. The sun is going down behind the rooftops. The heat of the day is finally breaking, and one by one, the families come outside. Look at that old rocking chair on the porch boards, worn smooth by years of use. It is not there for decoration. It is there because that is where the evening happened. A man sits down with a glass of iced tea, sweating in his hand. His wife brings out a bowl of green beans to snap for tomorrow. The children spill out into the yard, and up and down the block, the very same thing is happening on every single porch. Now here is the part that matters. While they sat there, they were watching. Not in a suspicious way, not in a fearful way, they were simply present. They saw who walked by. They saw whose car rolled down the street. They saw the boy coming home late, and they saw the stranger who lingered a little too long. That street had 100 sets of eyes on it, and every one of those eyes belonged to someone who knew your name. But hold on to that thought, because the eyes are only half of it. There is a deeper reason this worked, and we will get to it. Let me tell you about a woman named Ruth. This is the kind of story that played out in 10,000 towns across this country. Ruth was a farm wife turned town homemaker. She raised 6 children in a small white house with a deep front porch. Every evening, rain or shine, she sat out there with a basket of mending in her lap. Her needle moved while her eyes wandered the street. See that needle and thread working through the cloth? See the lamplight glowing gold through the screen door behind her? That was Ruth's post. That was her watch. One summer evening, a child went missing 2 streets over. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, who had wandered off while her mother hung the wash. In a city today, that might have ended in tears and sirens and a search that lasted all night. But not on Ruth Street. Within minutes, the word traveled porch to porch like a spark down a fuse. Ruth had seen a small child in a yellow dress walking toward the creek not 20 minutes before. She pointed. The men went, and that little girl was carried home safe before the sun finished setting. Nobody called the authorities. Nobody needed to. The neighborhood was the authority. That is the power we are talking about. And it did not come from fear. It came from something we have nearly forgotten how to build. Now you might be thinking that this is just sweet nostalgia, a pretty memory with no real weight behind it. But here is what nobody tells you. There is hard proof that this worked, and the proof has a name. Sociologists who studied American neighborhoods gave it a term. They called it natural surveillance. The simple idea that when ordinary people can see a public space from their own homes, that space becomes safe almost by magic. Picture an old university building with ivy on the brick. Inside, researchers spent years studying why some neighborhoods stayed peaceful while others fell apart. And again, the same answer came back. It was not the police, it was not the locks, it was the eyes on the street. One famous writer who studied cities wrote about this very thing back in the early 1960s. She watched a busy sidewalk from her window and noticed something. The places that felt safest were not the ones with the most patrols. They were the ones where shopkeepers, mothers, and old men sat watching the street all day long. She called those watchers the natural proprietors of the street. Picture an old book lying open on a wooden desk, its pages yellowed at the edges. The wisdom was written down, the studies were done, the numbers were counted, and the numbers told a clear story. Researchers found that homes and streets with good natural surveillance saw far less crime than those without it. In some studies, the difference was not small, it was dramatic. Whole blocks where neighbors knew each other and watched out for one another reported a fraction of the trouble found just a few streets away. But here is the question that should be burning in your mind right now. If it worked that well, if even the experts agreed, then where did it go? Why does your street sit empty every single evening? Hold that question, because the answer is going to surprise you, and it has nothing to do with crime going up. Before I tell you, let me say one quick thing. If stories like this one mean something to you, if they stir up a memory of a porch you once knew, I would be honored to have you stay with me. This little channel exists to keep the old wisdom alive, one story at a time. That is all. No pressure. Just a seat on the porch, if you want it. Now, back to that empty street, and the real reason the porches went quiet. It did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, the way a fire dies down to embers when no one tends it, and it started with a glowing box in the corner of the living room. Picture the soft blue flicker of an early television set, washing over a darkened room. In the early days, only one family on the block might have owned one, and on those nights, the whole neighborhood would crowd into one living room to watch. For a while, the television actually brought people together, but then nearly every home had one, and the pull of that glowing screen was strong, stronger than the porch, stronger than the conversation, stronger than the cool evening air. One by one, the chairs on the porch sat empty. The families went inside. The murmur of voices up and down the street faded into the muffled sound of programs playing behind closed windows. See that porch chair now, still and motionless, as the light dies in the sky behind it? Nobody came out to sit in it tonight, or the night before, or the night before that. But the television was only the beginning. There was a second invention, and this one finished the job. Picture a window unit humming in a window frame, dripping a little water onto the sill. Air conditioning. Here is something most folks never stop to consider. The whole reason people sat outside in the evening was that the inside of the house was unbearable. In the summer heat, the porch was the coolest, most pleasant place a family could be. The breeze came through, the shade kept off the worst of it. Sitting outside was not a choice, it was survival. But when the cool air moved indoors, the porch lost its purpose. Why sit out in the mosquitoes and the heat when the parlor was a comfortable 72 degrees? The frontier between the house and the world swung shut, and most people never even heard it close. And there was a third thing, a quieter culprit. The automobile and the way we built our towns around it. Picture a wide ribbon of new road stretching off toward the horizon. As cars became king, the front of the house changed. The porch, which once faced the sidewalk and the passing neighbors, gave way to the garage. The new houses in the new neighborhoods put the car out front and the people out back, behind a tall wooden fence. The deck behind the house replaced the porch in front of it. And do you see the difference? A porch faces the street. A back deck faces away from it. One says hello to the world. The other turns its back on it. So we stopped seeing each other. Not because we grew cold, not because we stopped caring, but because three machines, the television, the air conditioner, and the automobile, gently pulled us off the porch and locked the door behind us. But that is only half the story. Because when the eyes left the street, something invisible left with them, and what we built to replace it has made us lonelier than ever. Let me explain what really broke, because this is the deeper truth almost nobody talks about. When neighbors sat on their porches, they were not just watching for trouble, they were building something, something the experts have a fancy name for. They call it social capital. But your grandmother had a simpler word for it. She called it trust. Picture two old hands clasped together in a firm handshake. That was the currency of the old neighborhood. You knew the family 3 doors down. You knew the names of their children. You knew that if your car broke down or your roof leaked or your husband took ill, there were people within shouting distance who would come running. That trust was not free. It was earned, slowly, evening after evening, in 1,000 small conversations across 1,000 porch railings. A wave here, a shared piece of news there, a borrowed cup of sugar, a casserole brought over when someone was grieving. Picture a warm dish of food being carried up a front walk by careful hands. That casserole was not just supper, it was a message. It said, I see you. I know your pain. You are not alone on this street. And here is the mechanism, plain and simple. Honesty was easy in a place like that because dishonesty was almost impossible to hide. You could not be cruel to your wife when the whole block could hear through the open windows. You could not cheat your neighbor when you would have to face him on the porch the very next evening. You could not let your children run wild because 6 other mothers were watching them, and they would tell you, and they had every right to. The neighborhood was not honest because people were afraid of getting caught. It was honest because everybody knew everybody. And when you are truly known, you tend to behave like your better self. That is the secret. Not surveillance, not punishment, being known. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Because we did not simply lose that and leave the space empty, we tried to replace it. And what we built in its place tells you everything about what we lost. Picture a small camera mounted on the corner of a house, a tiny red light blinking in the dark. We replaced 100 caring human eyes with a single plastic lens. We swapped the neighbor who knew your name for a device that only records your face. Think about that for a moment. The old porch watcher and the modern security camera are both watching the same street, but they could not be more different. The neighbor watched because they cared about you. The camera watches because someone is afraid of you. One made you feel safe. The other makes you feel suspected. We have more locks than ever, more alarms, more cameras pointed at our own front doors. And yet study after study finds that people today feel less safe and more alone than the generations who left their doors wide open. Picture a heavy deadbolt sliding shut on a thick wooden door. We have sealed ourselves in. We have made our homes into little fortresses. And in doing so, we have made ourselves strangers to the very people who live closest to us. So what can you actually do about this? Because I do not want this to be just a sad story about something we lost. I want to give you something you can use, starting tonight. Here is the first thing, and it is the simplest thing in the world. Go sit on your porch, or your stoop, or your front steps, or just put a chair by your open front door if that is what you have. Picture a single chair being set down on a porch facing the street in the soft light of evening. That is the whole first step. You do not have to do anything. You do not have to talk to anyone. You just have to be present and visible where the world can see you. The second step. When someone walks by, look up and offer a wave, not a big production, just a nod, a lifted hand, a simple acknowledgement that says, I see you, neighbor. You would be amazed how starved people are for that small kindness. Picture a hand raised in a friendly wave across a quiet street. That gesture costs nothing, but it is the first thread in a rope that can hold a whole community together. The third step. Learn one name, just one. The next time you see the person from across the street, walk over and introduce yourself. Tell them your name and ask for theirs. It will feel awkward for about 10 seconds and then it will feel like coming home. Picture 2 neighbors talking over a low fence, leaning in, easy and unhurried. That is how it begins again. One name, one conversation, one evening at a time. The fourth step. Sit outside at the same time regularly. The magic of the old porch was its rhythm. People knew that every evening the same faces would be out. That predictability is what built the trust. So pick a time. After supper, maybe, and make it a habit. Picture the warm glow of a porch light flicking on as dusk settles over the street. That light is a signal. It says, I am here. Come find me if you need me. And the fifth step, the one that ties it all together. When you learn that a neighbor is struggling, do the old thing, bring the casserole, offer the ride, lend the tool. Generosity is the soil that trust grows in. You cannot demand it from others, but you can plant it yourself and watch what grows. Now, here is the part that almost nobody knows, the part that goes deeper than anything we have said so far. The front porch did not just keep neighborhoods honest, it quietly raised the children, and when it vanished, a whole way of growing up vanished with it. Picture children playing a game in a yard at dusk, chasing each other through the long shadows. In the old neighborhood, those children were never truly unsupervised and never truly alone. They roamed free, yes. They built forts and rode bikes until the streetlights came on. But the whole time they were inside a net of watching adults. Every porch was a guard post. Every grandmother was a sentry. A child could fall and skin a knee 3 blocks from home, and there would be a kind hand to help him up and a glass of water to soothe him. A child could try to do something foolish, and a dozen voices would call out to stop him. That net taught children 2 things at once. It taught them that the world was safe enough to explore, and it taught them that they were accountable to more than just their own parents. They belonged to the whole street, and the whole street belonged to them. Picture an old front gate swinging on its hinge, the kind a child would run through 100 times a day. When the porches emptied, that net dissolved, and we replaced the freedom of the old childhood with something we now call the scheduled childhood. Every minute planned, every activity supervised by a paid adult, every child driven from one locked building to the next. We did not do this because we are bad parents. We did it because the net of neighbors disappeared, and a frightened parent has no choice but to build a smaller, tighter cage. The cage is not the disease. It is the symptom. The disease is the empty porch. And here is the emotional truth at the heart of all of this. The thing I most want you to carry away. The old way was not about control. It was about belonging. Picture an extended family gathered on a wide porch on a summer evening, 3 generations together, the old and the young side by side. To sit on that porch was to know deep in your bones that you were part of something larger than yourself. You were a thread in a fabric, a note in a song. You were known and watched and cared for and held accountable all at once. And that, my friend, is not a prison. That is the very definition of home. We thought we were buying freedom when we went inside and shut the door. Cool air, private screens, no nosy neighbors minding our business. But what we actually bought was loneliness. We traded the warm burden of being known for the cold comfort of being left alone. And a great many people now spend their evenings in air-conditioned silence, wondering why they feel so isolated in a world more connected than ever. Picture an empty rocking chair on an empty porch, swaying gently in the evening breeze, with no one in it. That chair is still waiting. The porch is still there. The street is still there. The only thing missing is us. But it does not have to stay that way. And that brings me to a question I would truly love for you to answer. Tell me, down in the comments, about the porch you remember. Was it your grandmother's, with the swing that creaked? Was it your own, where you watched the world go by? What is the one memory that comes back to you of evenings spent watching the street when the whole neighborhood felt like family? I read these, and so do thousands of others who grew up the very same way. Your memory might be exactly the one someone else needed to hear tonight. And if this story stirred something in you, I hope you will stay a while. We are building a little porch of our own here, you and I, a place to remember the old ways and maybe carry a few of them forward. We will keep the old wisdom alive together, one story at a time. Before you go, Let me share two short letters from folks who watched videos like this one, because their words say it better than I ever could. The first came from a woman in her 70s. She wrote that after watching, she dragged an old chair out onto her front step for the first time in 20 years. She felt foolish, she said, sitting out there alone. But on the third evening, a young mother pushing a stroller stopped to say hello. Now, she wrote, they sit together most evenings. She said she had not realized how hungry she was for a familiar face until one finally appeared. She signed it with a full heart. The second came from a man who grew up in a coal town. He wrote that his street had 30 porches, and on a summer night you could walk the whole block and never run out of people to talk to. He said his own grandchildren have never known that feeling, and it grieves him. But he printed out the 5 steps, and he taped them to his refrigerator, and he has started waving to everyone who passes. He said 3 neighbors have waved back who never did before. Small things, he wrote, but they add up. That is the whole point, is it not? Small things add up. They always did. Now, I know some of you are listening with a careful, sensible mind, the kind of mind that asks hard questions. So let me answer a few of them the way I would if we were sitting on that porch together. You might be thinking, but the world really is more dangerous now. It is not safe to sit outside and trust strangers, and I understand that worry. But here is the gentle truth. Much of what makes a street dangerous is the very emptiness we have been talking about. An empty street, with no eyes on it, is the kind of street where trouble feels free to happen. The watchers do not make a street more dangerous, they make it safer. The danger grew, in part, because we went inside. You might be thinking, I am too old, or too shy, or too set in my ways to go knocking on doors and learning names. And to that I say, you do not have to. Start with the chair. Start with the wave. That is all. The neighbor will come to you in time. Being present is 90% of it. You have already done harder things than sit in a chair and lift your hand. You might be thinking, my neighborhood is just not built for this. The houses face away, the cars rush by, there is no place to sit and no one to see, and that may be true of the layout. But people are people, in any layout. A front step works. A garage with the door open works. A bench by the mailbox works. The porch was never really about the wood and the posts. It was about the willingness to be seen, and that you can carry anywhere. And you might be thinking, this is all very nice, but the world has moved on, and there is no going back. Perhaps. We will likely never return to the way things were. The televisions and the cool air and the cars are here to stay, but here is what I have learned in my long years. The old wisdom does not ask you to turn back the clock. It only asks you to carry the best of the past into the present. You cannot rebuild 1955, but you can sit on your porch tonight. You can learn one name. You can be the eyes on your street and the kind face at the gate for whoever needs one. The porch is still there, my friend. The chair is still there, waiting in the soft evening light. The only question left is whether you will go and sit in it. So tonight, before the light fades all the way, do one small thing. Carry a chair to your front door. Sit down. Look out at the street where you live. And let the world see you sitting there the way your grandparents did, keeping watch over a place worth caring about. That is how a neighborhood stays honest. That is how a street becomes a home, not with locks and cameras and walls, but with a chair, a porch, and a person willing to be known. We will keep the old wisdom alive together, one story at a time. I will see you on the porch.